The Palace of Holyroodhouse has been a royal residence for over 500 years. It lies at the heart of Edinburgh, Scotland's capital city, overlooked by Arthur's Seat, an extinct volcano, and at the foot of a historic thoroughfare known as the Royal Mile, which joins Edinburgh Castle and the palace.
The palace sits next to Holyrood Abbey, which was founded by David I in 1128. Legend has it that he was out hunting in the area one day when he was attacked by a stag, and as he reached out to defend himself, a cross appeared between the antlers of the stag. The name of the site Holyrood comes from Scots Holy Rood or Holy Cross.
Round about the early 1500s, during the reign of James IV, it was decided to create a much larger and separate royal palace.
In 1503, James IV marries Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII. The first purpose-built royal residence was built here to accommodate James IV and Margaret, and their son, James V, had it all torn down and rebuilt. Mary Queen of Scots is one of the best-known figures associated with the Palace of Holyroodhouse. She was raised primarily in France, but from 1561, when she was 19 years old, she returned to Scotland and made the palace her primary residence.
She eventually married her cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, who had a claim on the English throne. But the marriage was not a success. He proved to be idle, vain, violent on occasion, and by the time Mary was pregnant, the marriage was in serious trouble. So Darnley grew very jealous of Mary's Italian secretary, David Rizzio, who worked closely with Mary, but also was an entertaining person. He played music and spent a lot of time with Mary. The Protestant nobles of Scotland at this time were also dissatisfied with Mary's rule, and they came together with Darnley and plotted to get rid of Rizzio, who they felt was the source of a lot of their problems. On the night of the 9th of March 1566, here in the palace, Mary was dining with Rizzio in her private apartments in her tiny little supper room. When Darnley burst into the room, he came up the private stair between his own apartments and Mary's apartments. He was followed by a number of men. Tables, candles, food were all knocked to the ground. Mary, who was pregnant at the time, was horrified, and Rizzio clung onto her skirts, trying to stop them attacking him. They dragged him away through her bedchamber into the outer chamber, joined by other men, and he was stabbed many times, between 52 and 60 times, with daggers and swords, and then unceremoniously dumped down the staircase.
After the murder of David Rizzio, Mary withdrew to the safety and security of Edinburgh Castle to give birth to her son James. As an adult, James VI based his court here at the Palace of Holyroodhouse. He happened to be in residence here when he received the news that Elizabeth I had died, and that subsequently he was king in England, thus uniting the thrones of England and Scotland. He left the palace for London just a few days after receiving this news, and after this the palace fell out of regular use.
Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, but before that, during the Civil War, the palace had suffered damage by fire, so it was in need of renovation. Sir William Bruce, the Scottish architect, was brought in, and he designed a perfectly symmetrical facade using elements of old architecture and introduced a new tower on the southwest side, joined by a new west front. Inside were created a series of Baroque interiors with very elaborate ceilings and an enfilade as the rooms progressed from one to the other. The largest room in the house is the Great Gallery, where a series of portraits were commissioned particularly for this room to represent the Stuart dynasty. So 110 portraits of Scottish kings were painted by the Dutch artist Jacobite. The newly built Holyroodhouse represented the monarch in Scotland and the seat of the Scottish government, even in the absence of the monarch. Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie as he is better known, was trying to reclaim the throne of both Scotland and England for the Stuarts, who they felt were the rightful heirs. And in 1745, he arrived in Scotland, where he already had a number of supporters, known as Jacobites, and they followed him through Scotland to Edinburgh, where he occupied the palace and set up court here. He made himself very visible when he was at the palace. He dined in public, people could watch him take his meals, and he held a number of evening entertainments here in the Great Gallery, including a ball. In 1822, when George IV decided to visit Scotland, the news was greeted with great euphoria. It was an incredibly exciting and significant moment, the first reigning monarch to visit for nearly 200 years. He held a number of events inside the palace, including a reception for over 2,000 gentlemen and a drawing room for 500 ladies, and he greeted them by kissing each one on the cheek.
On one occasion, George IV famously wore Highland dress at an event at the palace. He wore the kilt and the accoutrements which remain on display in the palace today.
Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had a deep love of Scotland and acquired their own Highland home, Balmoral Castle. They would regularly stop off at Holyroodhouse with their family, starting a tradition of the royal family staying here with their families.
Prince Albert took a characteristic interest in the redesigning of the gardens here at the palace. The gardens were laid out with shrubberies and winding paths, and this sets the pattern for the 16 acres of palace gardens as we see them today.
Throughout the 20th century, the palace was modernised and upgraded and began to be used very regularly by members of the royal family. A number of important ceremonies have taken place at the palace, and in 2022 it became the focus of the nation when Queen Elizabeth II lay in rest in the throne room at the palace. King Charles III continues to use the palace regularly and carries out a number of ceremonies and events here, such as garden parties and investitures.
The Palace of Holyroodhouse is open year-round for visitors to enjoy learning about 9 centuries of Royal Scottish history.